Possibility means you have a chance.
Passion opens the door to all possibilities.
When I feel like anything's possible, I feel kind of giddy.
I want to be an astronaut, an artist, an actress.
To visit another country.
All I need is a backpack and a pair of shoes, and I'll find a way.
That I'm able to do anything I set my mind to.
I've never felt like more things are possible than right now.
In the right shoes, anything's possible.
DSW, countless shoes at brag-worthy prices. Imagine the possibilities.
Hey, this is Jason Kleberg from the Force 5 podcast, a show that forces a guest to come up with a movie-themed top 5 list topic, and then we reveal our picks on air. Top 5 heist films, top 5 tearjerkers, top 5 movie dogs. Every show you'll be asking yourself, what would be on my list? Guests include directors, screenwriters, actors, podcasters, musicians, authors, and even a professional wrestler. Subscribe to the Force 5 podcast, and you won't just be a listener, you'll be a list nerd. The Force 5 podcast, available wherever you're listening now.
Editor-in-Chief of Kultureshock.com, Chris Stachiw here. On the site, we used to run a series called One-on-One With, where we would interview people involved in the entertainment industry, including actors, television actors, film actors, and voice actors. So instead of just posting those interviews to the site, we thought for your listening convenience that we would release them along with the Kulturecast, so that you could check them out easier and get to them on your podcast app. This week, we're going to be kicking off this new podcast version of One-on-One With. This week, we're going to be kicking off the new podcast version of One-on-One with an interview I did earlier this week with Sam McMurray. You may know Sam McMurray from his roles in Dinosaurs as Roy. He was a featured player on the Tracey Ullman Show. He was actually Chandler's boss on Friends and Doug's boss on King of Queens. He's also in a film we talked about earlier this month, Raising Arizona. He's also been in National Lampoon's Christmas Vacation and another personal favorite of mine, Chud, otherwise known as Cannibalistic Humanoid Underground Dwellers. I got to speak with him earlier this week about his roles on some of those films. We start off the interview talking about Raising Arizona, and then we just transition into some more random stories about some of the other projects that he's worked on in his very storied career. It's a fantastic in-depth interview, and I will catch up with you afterwards. Enjoy. With the film, and how were you cast as the role of Glenn?
Well, I was living in New York at the time. It was actually just before I moved out to LA, so it was early '86 or late '85. I go in to read for the Coen Brothers, and they had done Blood Simple. Was the only thing they had done before that. And you may know this, but the interesting thing is that it was supposed to be Holly Hunter in Blood Simple, and she couldn't do it because she was doing Miss Firecracker, or the Bette Henley play, maybe the other one on Broadway, which I actually saw her in. And she said, "You should see my roommate, Frances." Now, as it happens, I knew Frances from the O'Neill, which is, do you know what the O'Neill is? It's a playwrights conference every summer. It's still going. They would debut new plays, and I had been going there since '83. And I think Frances was there in '84, I guess. Anyway, and I had also done a commercial with her, which had nothing to do, in fact, with, my getting the role. But so I had sort of, I knew of Joel, I guess, and not Ethan so much. So Donna Isaacson was casting that, and I was in New York, and they said, "Come on in," and I went in, and I wanted to read for one of the brothers, the Billy Forsythe role, I think. They said, no, read for Glenn. And this is interesting because it sort of demonstrates how an actor can fall prey to the worst kind of inference. In the description, it had said Glenn was short and blonde, and I'm neither. So I said, well, shouldn't I read for the brother? They go, no, read for Glenn. So I said, okay. So I kind of read for Glenn, and I kind of, just sort of threw something together, and they seemed to spark to it immediately. I think I went back a second time. I think I saw John Goodman at the thing, who I knew from New York days, too. And we're kind of going like, what is this? I don't know. It's kind of funny, though, isn't it? And I went in a second time, and they were just sort of a couple of bobbleheads, Joel and Ethan, going, yep. So okay, let's do it. And then I was doing a play. This is when I still did theater. In Connecticut, I was doing actually 2 plays. I was rehearsing one, and I was playing in a production of the Philadelphia Story. So I was doing Philadelphia Story. I was finishing that up, but I was doing a new play called Union Boys, which I still love, which I had done at the aforementioned place, the O'Neill, by a brilliant playwright and screenwriter named James Yashimura, who is a Chicago guy, actually. And this was at Yale Rep. I had done it the previous summer, I said, at the O'Neill. So I go, we do the thing, but I'm killing myself because I'm driving up and down Connecticut on I-95. I'm doing the play. I'm going to rehearse in New Haven and driving halfway home and doing Philadelphia Story, right? So we get the play opened, and Joel and Francis actually, I think, came very early on to the run-through. And it was like, great, we'll see you in Arizona and so forth. And I try to shorten a long story. I got ill. I actually got German measles because I was just burning the candles, you know. So I actually missed a couple of performances. The interesting thing was this is at the time that Bartlett Giamatti was the president of Yale, who was, of course, the father of Paul and Marcus. And Marcus was the actor at the time. Paul was not acting, as far as I know. But Bart would come around, and I've never met a more interesting human being, I just have to say that, than him. Anyway, I missed 2 performances. Marcus went on for me. And then we got that stuff wrapped up. And then I think like a month later, I went out to Scottsdale. And I think the budget on the movie was something like $2 million, period, which in, 1986 was still no money, right? I think we got paid less than $1,000 a week. I think whatever SAG scale was at the time, like $850 or something. But it was the most enjoyable shoot I've ever been on. I mean, they had promoted their distributor from Blood Simple to being the production entity, and they were great. I mean, they did things like they'd go to the air, they'd find out when my wife was flying in. They went to the airport and picked her up without even, asking me about it and so forth. And they were just terrific. And we shot it out in the desert, and Barry Sonnenfeld was the DP. And I remember the first day on the set, I was, I think, the first one when we go visit, Nick Cage and Holly in the trailer because they've got the new baby, right? And they're shooting over my shoulder onto Nick or to Holly, I can't remember. And Barry Sonnenfeld says, that doesn't work for me. And I'm like, well, he's the DP. He's not the director, right? So I'm thinking it must be a camera angle he doesn't like. But no, he's having issues with the acting aspect of it, which I found bizarre. The DP doesn't talk like that, right? But I look at Joel and Ethan, and they nod. They go, yeah. And so basically it was directed by 3 people. And it worked somehow, I later worked with Joel on Addams Family Values. With Ethan. No, I'm sorry, with Barry Sonnenfeld. Sorry. And you would have thought that Barry had never seen a camera before, but he was the director by that time. He's an interesting character. So anyway, we did that, and I had, the term drop and pick up. It's what they get away with on a movie. If they don't need you for a couple of weeks, they can actually say, well, you're on a drop and pick up, which means basically you're on your own for 2 weeks. So my wife and I came out to L.A. where I had, I'd been before, but I hadn't moved, and I got a pilot, which didn't go, but that's another story. But that became the thing that sort of induced me to come out west. So we came out in September of '86, and I never worked for the Coen Brothers since. The movie opened, and it didn't do much, as you may recall, or maybe not because you're too young. It didn't open. Actually, it was sort of picked up by fraternities and so forth, and they would show it on college campuses, and that gave it a second life, really. On the other hand, the movies were not expensive to make, and it certainly helped launch people like John Goodman, who was already established in New York and so forth, and then the late, great Trey Wilson, who was in it, who played Nathan Arizona. Trey was actually...
If you're looking for more horror outside of the mainstream, look no further than Unsung Horrors, a podcast about underseen horror movies. I'm Lance.
And I'm Erica. Every other week, we'll cover a horror movie with fewer than 1,000 views on Letterboxd. We'll even give you double feature recommendations to pair with the movies we discuss.
From gothic to shot on video, from slashers to comedies, from giallo to J-horror, We'll cover all the subgenres, so join us as we unearth these hidden gems of horror.
Follow us on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook, all at Unsung Horrors, available wherever you listen to podcasts. And part of the Someone's Favorite Productions podcast network.
Hello, filthy movie lovers. My name is Gentry Austin.
And I'm Casey Scott.
And we're the hosts of the Sin Syndicate, film podcast for something weirdos, anti-criterion bros, and Joseph Sarno aficionados. Join us semi-weekly as we peer into the adults-only theaters and sticky-floored cinemas of the golden age of sexploitation, when the morals were loose, the laws were murky, and the intercourse was all simulated. Find us now on the Someone's Favorite Productions podcast network.
Supposed to do the part that Albert Finney did in Miller's Crossing, and he died of a not a tumor, like a brain hemorrhage, a stroke essentially. Lovely guy, and I never worked with them again. And I'd hear about a movie, and I'd ask about it, and I go, no, nothing, but Joel's going to call you tonight. I go, okay. And then he wouldn't. And then they'd say, or I'd be on another movie, and a guy would come over and say, oh, Joel says hello. I go, oh, great. Well, what's going on? It's very strange. After about 9 years of it, I got kind of weird. I thought, well, I guess we're just not going to work together again, which was, I have to say, bothersome because we were friends, But, that's baseball, I guess. So finally, my friend Stephen Root, Stephen, who had worked for them a number of times, including Brother, Where Art Thou, and was working on the Coen Brothers movie. Sorry, I'm old now, from the can't I think of it? Not in the Brother, Where Art Thou, but No Country for Old Men. Oh, pulled it out. So Steve had a couple of days on that because he was always doing small roles for them. And he's a brilliant actor, by the way. So Steven says, who's a good friend of mine, says, do you want me to say anything to Joel? I said, yeah, tell him I said, go fuck yourself. And he did. And I said, what was Joel's reaction? He said he laughed. I said, well, good. That's what I wanted, But it didn't matter. I still haven't seen him in whatever it's been, 30 years now. So that's my Raising Arizona story. And I still would say it's the most enjoyable movie set I ever worked on. And it was a good group too. We were all, we hung pretty close. And Billy Forsythe and I later worked together again on a less than stellar film called Stone Cold. But
I've read in a couple publications that the Coen brothers are very meticulous and particular with the way that they write dialogue for their characters.
Absolutely.
Can you kind of explain as an actor what that's like?
Well, let me say this. There are a lot of writers who are very particular about the words they write and want them said in a certain, fashion and so forth, and there's a lot of that in television. For the most part, though, they really have no justification for that because the writing isn't that good. You know what I'm saying? In the case of the Coen brothers, if you read the script of Raising Arizona, and I haven't read their other, it is so particular, it is so precise that it deserves to be honored. Now, having said that, there was towards the very end of the shoot, I do the scene with Nick Cage in the trailer. And by the way, the production designer is Tony Goldwyn's wife. Brilliant. Okay. Because when I worked on Scandal, Tony and I got caught up. So I come in and I had worked on the thing the night before. And I think I saw some, lousy television in which a guy was doing a scene in which he popped nuts into his mouth as he was talking. And I decided to do that in the middle of the scene while I'm saying, how'd you get that baby? By the way, I heard with the one with the Negro baby with his heart born on the outside, or whatever the hell it was, And then I go, look at Buford, he already knows his ABCs. And then I picked up a handful of these nuts and I threw them as if you were there, saying, hit the deck, boy. I just did that. And that is the only ad-libbed line in the movie. And the crew laughed rather mightily, I like to think, at that. And Joel and Ethan looked at each other, and they excused the cast for like 15 minutes. We had to go outside like, we were going to detention. And they brought us back in. Well, it was me. It wasn't Nick. It was me who did the ad-lib. And they went, okay, but don't do that again. So that's why it's in the film. But I was reprimanded lightly for having ad-lib. That's how particular they are. I wouldn't say strict, but and for the I would adhere to that kind of stuff. I'm not a big believer in actors ad-libbing, but it just kind of came over me, and it was a good moment, and so it happened, and it's in the movie. But yes, so they are very particular about their writing. Maybe that's why they didn't call. You think? Whatever. Well, what was written was that Mordecai, one of the Buford, who already knows ABCs, he had written fart on the wall. So I was just alluding to it, but throwing the nuts at that was entirely my own thing. And they shot it from my point of view as well as his, so that's why it's in the film. But that kind of writing, the playwright Edward Albee said something years ago, which I've always felt is true, that good writing leads to inevitability. And for an actor, that means your inevitability of choice in terms of your action. If it's really good, if it's really crystalline, if it's Shakespeare, or, if it's Arthur Miller, it will take you to a place where it makes the choice for you. In other words, the writing is so good that you have no other option but to follow the writing. So, for instance, when I did Sopranos, was that 16 years ago now, right? I played this oncologist who cures Dominic Chianese, right, of cancer. And I got so many compliments from people when it aired, when really all I wanted to say was, but you don't understand. The writing on that show is so good that all you have to do, essentially, is say the word and have the intention. I said, you think that's good? I said, I tell you what's good is if you do a crappy sitcom, I won't name them, but you can fill in the blank, and you make it funny. That's an achievement. You know what I mean? Because and I can't say that I've always succeeded in that. There have been times I went, oh, well, you know what, man, they just need this to happen. And so I remember coming out to L.A. in '86, and I did a cop show with Catherine Keener, as a matter of fact, and I was the bad guy. And so the thing kind of plods along, and the detective's uncovering who's the bad guy. And then in the last 5 minutes of the thing, he spells out what I've done, and when I apparently completely lose my mind, I jump up and I pull a gun on Catherine Keener and try to hold her hostage, and somebody clonks me on the head. But it was like, this makes no sense. Why is that? Why am I capitulating? Why am I basically confessing? I said, well, because it's the end of the show. That's why. There's no real logic built in, So you do a lot of that, and you get a residual for $12, and you say thank you, many years later. So, but you're right. But I have to say that to this day, still, for the most part, I think that better writing happens in terms of theater. Not to say that there isn't great screenwriting or great television writing. I mean, like I said, Sopranos. I think The Wire, for instance, is the best television show ever. Period. And I think that writing is brilliant, and it never underlines. It never puts anything in italics. It just, if you follow the story, it will pay off, And that was true with the Sopranos episode I did, for instance. I just thought it was a piece of brilliant writing. It was funny, and it was a great show. So, I love television. Don't let me go anywhere else with that. Yes, I ran into the cactus. We did 3 takes. The first one, I was late. The second take, the camera was late, and the third one nailed it. And believe me, nailed it is, the appropriate term.
I've read about you interacting with Nick Cage in the film, specifically a story when you're eating out at a diner and someone asked about...
Oh, really? You read that somewhere? The story about the girl asking him to sign her wet cocktail napkin? She was like 14, yeah.
Right.
And he wrote, "Tomorrow you will die." Which I thought was entirely appropriate and quite funny. It's amazing what makes the rounds, though, isn't it? Me and my big mouth. Yeah.
What was it like working with Nick Cage?
I thought he was terrific. He had a bit of a name. He had done the movie with his, the Peggy Sue Got Married, right, with his uncle. But I thought, I had no particular opinion of him. I knew Holly and I knew Fran. I mean, they were friends, too. As I said, I knew John, I knew Trey, I didn't know Billy. Got to know him later. Trying to think who else. Randy Cobb, thankfully I never had anything to do with. But I thought Nick was terrific. I thought he actually had some great stuff that I think wound up on the cutting room floor. But He was very open. Yeah, how do I mean that? I mean, he was a curious guy. He was seeking, and in terms of a lot of things, you know. And we talked about, what was the movie he did with Sean Penn, was it, where he was like, you know, they were city kids and so forth, whatever. And he did a lot of scenes with his shirt off, and he felt that he didn't want to be thought of as just a body, which has never been an issue for me, I should add. But so, you know, he was, I think, not anxious, but he was eager to sort of go against type. And I think he's terrific in the movie myself. I think everybody's great in the movie, Holly and Frances. And, you know, Frances auditioned for the role, which was unnecessary. You know, I mean, Joel said, no, why don't you do this? She said, no, I'm coming in. I'm going to read for you. He's like, okay. So she went in and she auditioned, and Joel went, okay, you happy now? You got it, you know. So, but that Frances wanted to earn it, you know, not that she hadn't already earned it in spades. I have to tell you this story. Before that, I think must have been 84, Frances and I did a play called Trinity, which was about the Manhattan Project, you know, in New Mexico. And it was an interesting play. And, you know, this was during the development of the A-bomb and so forth. But at the O'Neill, there's the playwright whose name escapes me right now. I apologize. But they also assigned a dramaturg, you know, to look, you know, the work. And we had Athol Fugard, who is the great, great South African playwright. And he worked with us, and it was a terrifically memorable experience, not just for Frances, but also, you know, to work with Athol, who was just the most giving human being, you know, I'd met in a long time. Just that's what FYI, you can put that in or not, but that's, I think, where I met her. And then we did a beer commercial together or something like that. I haven't seen her in forever, but I think she's great. Even without, you know, even if her husband never calls me, I still think she's great. In fact, I think he's pretty great. So you know, I'm like that. I'm easy now. In fact, I was in New York and I was talking to a musician friend of mine, and I brought up Steve Root's name, and he said, "Well, you remember him in Oh Brother Where Art Thou?" I said, "No, I didn't see it because, you know, I was miffed or something." He said, "You got to watch the scene." So on my iPad, I watched the scene in Oh Brother Where Art Thou. Well, I mean, I've just, you know, I had snot bubbles coming out of my nose, and it was just so funny. So
of your scenes in the film, what strikes you as the most memorable or your favorite? And then from the film as a whole, what scene stands out to you as your favorite?
Well, I love Trey in it. I mean, you know, when he says, you know, get your feet off the table. I mean, when he's got the press in the house and so forth. My name ain't Nathan Arizona. I think he's just brilliant in the thing. And I knew him slightly in New York, but he just kind of exploded, I thought, on the screen. But I will tell you this, and you can bank on it. When I'm doing a scene where I've run into the cactus and now I'm wearing a big neck brace and I got a black eye and a cotton stuffed up my nose, and I say, I'm sending you a bill and you best pay it, right? We were outside and I was doing something. Oh, I was banging my head on the door on the way back because I'm so, you know, worked up. The Coen brothers kept laughing and spoiling the take. I mean, they must have spoiled 5 or 6 takes, and they wound up using a less than brilliant one because, you know, that was the one they didn't laugh in. But it did piss me off. I said, shut the fuck up, would you? I'm glad you like it. Now be quiet. But they kept ruining it for sound. It was amazing. So you can put that in your bank of lore from Raising Arizona, and if they deny it, then they're lying. That's all I can say. I mean, it was really like, yeah, thanks, okay. You know, the first time it was like funny. Oh, they like it, they laugh. But the 3rd, 4th, 5th take, I'm going, stop. Anyway, I still enjoyed myself.
For you as an actor, when working with the Coens or directors like them, do you prefer to work with directors that have a very clear vision in mind versus, you know, just kind of free and loose with the actors in their time?
Well, you know, no, they definitely, I mean, obviously the director should always have a concept. If they're really good, if they're Mike Nichols, or if they're John Pasquin, or my friend Don Scardino, they will basically fool you into thinking they don't know quite where to go with this thing and then let you discover what they've been looking for all along. That's what a really good director does. The Coens are autodidact, you know. They wouldn't know an acting moment from a hole in the ground. And I don't mean that negatively. I mean, they are what they are, and they're brilliant. John Sayles is like that. And I've done 2 movies with John and many years apart, but I will say that the difference between the first time I worked with John and the last time I worked with him, which was 20 years, he'd learned a great deal. So when I first worked with him, I did a movie called Baby It's You. I was still living in New York then, which was not his project. I mean, he didn't write it. It was actually written by Amy Robinson, and Griffin Dunn produced it and so forth. They were partners. They had done Chilly Scenes of Winter. So, and John was terrific, but, you know, he was a writer. And he would just go, yeah, okay, let's go again. That was all you got from him. But he was a good guy, and, you know, liked him. And then years later, I did this movie called Sunshine State with him, which I think is a terrifically underrated film. And John, man, he came loaded for bear. John said, here's your backstory, here's this thing. He's like that. I mean, I'll tell you a story, and it's sort of off topic, but I think it maybe illustrates what an actor wants on film. My father was an actor, and in the late 40s, early 50s, he did a lot of live television in New York when it was, you know, the golden years, as they said. And he worked with a young director named Sidney Lumet a great deal, and Grace Kelly before she'd been discovered and so forth. And he did Playhouse 90 and Omnibus. So these are live television shows, you know, hour-long stuff. And Lumet and my father had a particular fondness from one another. So my father dies in '84, quite suddenly around Christmas time. And I come out here to California. By then he'd moved out here from New York. And I'm taking care of things. And after about a week, I get a phone call saying, would you come back to New York and meet Sidney Lumet? I don't think I've ever told this story publicly before. So I said, sure, because every actor wants to work with Sidney Lumet, because Sidney Lumet comes to you, and it doesn't matter if you're playing an under 5 or you're the lead in the movie, he will give you all that you need. He'll give you your information, he will give you your action, he will give you your motivation, he will give you your intention. There's 3 ways of saying the same thing, but you know what I mean, right? And it doesn't matter whether, you know, like you're playing a clerk and the lead comes in and wants a file. He will tell you why you don't want to give this guy the file. Now, that's a film director, right, who knows how to talk to actors. Of course, Lumet had been an actor when he was a kid. Just to finish off the story, I fly back in. I go up to his office on West 57th Street. I go inside, and Lumet is smoking unfiltered Camels, which, until I quit, was my brand of choice, too. And he looks at me and goes, Jesus Christ, who do you remind me of? I said, Richard McMurray. He says, yeah, how is he? Anyway, he later offered me a part in the movie with 2 people I'd worked with, Denzel Washington and Richard Gere, and I couldn't do it. And I've always regretted that, you know, the chance to work with the prime actor's director. So I don't know if that helps you, but a friend of mine who worked with Mike Nichols, and I had an experience with Mike Nichols too, which was wonderful. But a friend of mine had worked with him on Comedians, a wonderful play, said that Nichols would come in basically going, well, I don't know what this is about. How about we roll it out and try this, try that, the other thing? And a good director will do that and keep his ego locked away. And the Coen brothers are not egotistical at all, but they have a very strong vision of what they want. But then you get other guys who really can't talk to actors at all. And you have to do a lot of work to figure out what it is that they want, or when do you take over and say, you know what, this is the way it's going to go. Now, I don't want to, you know, name any names because it's, you know, there's a wide variety, just as there is in terms of actors and so forth. But there are directors who should never be allowed to direct because they have, or at the very least, they should be sent back to acting school and learn the process that an actor goes through to some degree, because they don't get it. They don't understand moment to moment. They don't know anything. It's like network executives. They don't know. They want to be told what it is they want, you know? So very often you go in there and you go, what do you want? And you go, think like, you know, my favorite is like, and they'll give you voiceover copy, and they'll say things like, think James Earl Jones, the narrator, not James Earl Jones, the actor. And I think you do know that's the same person, right? Yeah. Maybe they do, maybe they don't. So, actors are, or directors rather, are, some of them know. Sometimes they know and you don't agree with them, but, you know, I always, you know, I'll give them a shot. I always try it because I don't know necessarily, you know. I can't recall any time I was particularly at odds with the director, like going, no, it's got to go this way. No, he says it's got to, no, I don't recall that. Usually they live by the notion that casting is, you know, more than 50% of getting it right, you know. So once they cast the actor, they just leave him alone and you go do it, you know.
Right.
I've also worked with other actors who kind of bled the thing dry and basically go, you know what, just shut the fuck up and let's do the thing, Mm-hmm. Sometimes you can't help it, but you can kill it, But no, I mean, I like I liked working with Barry for that, man. Barry definitely had an eye. I don't know that he knows how to tell an actor to get from A to B. I think he leaves that up to the actor for the most part. But he certainly knew where the funny was, to quote Billy Wilder, about Marilyn Monroe.
Right.
So, and I worked with a lot of directors in television, some of whom were terrific, some of whom were not so much. But that's baseball, or acting, or both.
Right.
Yeah.
Even though clearly Joel Coen keeps saying hi to you and to say hi to you, and you haven't worked with him since Raising Arizona. I'm assuming you have watched some of the Coen brothers films.
Yes. No, I watch them. Yeah, sure. I'm a fan.
Other than Raising Arizona, do you have a favorite?
Well, first of all, you're right in saying Raising Arizona is my favorite, and it's not without reason. It's not just because I'm in it. I think it's maybe their most well-realized film, in particular, and unique film. No, I like a lot of their stuff. I mean, I like No Country for Old Men. I did not like Miller's Crossing, and you can say I just thought it was kind of, I don't know, I just didn't like it, and put it that way. And it wasn't because I wasn't in it. I said No Country. I mean, Oh Brother, Where Art Thou? I like a lot of their stuff. I mean, their stuff is A True Grit was fun, That's speaking of Dakin Matthews. Dakin was in that, right? And I know that Steve Root wanted to play that part. I don't think I'm telling tales out of school, but they went with Dakin. I don't know what else. What other Raising Arizona? What other? Oh, I had problems with. Although I admired their shit. What's the one with Michael Stuhlbarg? Solitary Man, whatever the thing that Richard Kind is in it too. The one they shot in the Midwest, where they're from. Nobody hits 100%. Everybody. If you hit a double every now and then, you're doing good. It's like somebody said to me once, when you go into audition, don't try to hit it out of the park. Just try to get on base. To mix my metaphors. But it's true. So. And I think it was very near and dear to them. I think it was important to them. So I'm glad that they were able to do it in that respect. But, I'm a fan of all those people that were in the movie in Raising Arizona. Really, I am. I think Goodman is tremendous, and Fran and Holly and, everybody. Who else was in it? I don't know. Trey, as I said. And I'm just blanking on some of the other people. But, it was a wonderful experience. So.
When people recognize you, say on the street, you're out, just minding your own business. Right. What is it normally for?
It's interesting. I was just in New York. There was an exhibit of Diane Arbus. You know who she was? Photographer. She shot a lot of freaks and stuff like that. She's very interesting. But this was at the Met. And I went with an old college pal of mine, in part because her brother was a man named Howard Nemeroff, who was the poet laureate of the United States in the 70s. Anyway, I got recognized more at the Diane Arbus show at the Met than anywhere else. I thought, considering this is the literati or the intelligentsia of New York City, there's a lot of people who watch television. So mostly it's King of Queens. More recently, it's been a series I did called Christella, which was on for a season and deserved a better fate. Also from Friends, and occasionally, and those people I take out to lunch, I get recognized from a series I had in the 90s called Likely Suspects. And then from Raising Arizona, too, or maybe some other movies, even including Stone Cold, which has a following. But for the most part, I would say it's from, I did a lot of King of Queens. I did like 2-3 dozen, so I get that a lot. But, yeah, every now and then, and they never know my name. It's always like, what's that show you come out on? Oh, yeah, I don't know, and I wind up standing there giving my credits for 20 minutes, and they're going, no, that ain't it, But every once in a while, I also did Scandal. I get from time to time. Every once in a while, I was on an airplane. I was doing Devious Maids, and I was flying from Atlanta to New York, and the woman behind me says, "Are you Sam McMurray?" I said, "Come on, we're going to lunch. Come, whatever you want. It's on me." Because no one knows my name. It's just, what's that show? Right. That guy, the guy who you did that thing with? What was that? So that's my level of recognition. It's very interesting, too, because Steve Root and I are close, and Steve is very close with Wayne Knight, and I've known Wayne longer than Steve has. I've known Wayne for over 30 years, and we can't walk down the street together, and it's not because of me. you know. All you hear is,
of course.
Newman, you know. It's impossible. But, you know, oh well, that's the game. Mm-hmm.
So I was going to say, you didn't mention what if I saw you in public, I would mention, I would just say, oh my God, he's putting in a pool, from Christmas Vacation.
Oh, see, I did that movie. It was kind of a drag, quite honestly. But it's become a Christmas favorite. I had never seen it. Like 3 years ago, I'm in New York with my daughters and my ex-wife. And my eldest daughter had an apartment in Queens, and she says, come on, we're going to watch Christmas Vacation. So she had rented it, and we watched it. And that was the first and only time I've seen it. And I think it's a perfectly likable, silly movie. The only interesting thing about it is that I did a show called The Fosters, in which I played Terry Polo's father. And we shot it in a place called the Warner Brothers Ranch, which is in Burbank. And right next door is the house from Christmas Vacation.
Wow.
And I had done a movie with Tom Wilkinson, you know, the English actor. Mm-hmm. Now, they said, Tom is very anxious to meet you. I said, really? We were shooting this movie in Cleveland. It's called Jenny's Wedding. It's actually a rather nice little film, in which Tom and I play firemen, and his daughter, Katie Heigl, gets married to another woman. And, of course, there's, you know, big shrine about that. So Tom comes up to me and he says, so do you think that Jennifer is going to be all right? I said, Jennifer Aniston? He said, yeah, because I'm worried about her, but I think this guy she's with now is very nice, you know? I was like, what is with you and friends? She said, well, I love it. I watch it and I feel better about the world after half an hour. So I was actually shooting this show at Warner Brothers, and these houses, which are all freestanding, have been there forever, was also used for Bye Bye Birdie and the whole thing. And I'm walking by the fountain, which they use in the opening title shot of Friends, of course. So I had to take a selfie with me cavorting in the fountain and send it to Tom Wilkins. But I thought Christmas Vacation, this was a perfectly dopey movie, and it was actually fine, you know. And I ran into Chevy in Vegas a few years later with Beverly D'Angelo, and they were shooting whatever Vacation in Vegas was. And Chevy said, he was kind of hammered. He said, but, man, I wanted you on this because, you know, you should be my friend and you should continue. I said, you know, thanks, whatever, you know. But, you know, and I'm in it for a nanosecond, quite honestly. But, well, you know, the check clears. So every Christmas time, we get a little bump, you know. That's nice. But it's certainly, you know, I kind of shake my head when people think that's memorable. I go, really? That's what you know me from? I'm okay, whatever, you know. I'm not saying anything, you know, that's where you recognize me, that's fine, but you also know Raising Arizona. But you're more of a film guy, obviously, I can tell. Now, if you want to see something good, and I'm gonna pimp my friend out here. If you want to see something good, a web series called Then We Got Help! ! I did a movie 6 summers ago in Nashua, New Hampshire. I don't think it's ever been released, but it should be released, you know, like Let Go. Anyway, you can strike that. But I did this movie in Nashua, New Hampshire, and there was a young woman playing my daughter on it named Julianne Emery. Do you know who she is? Do you watch Fargo or anything like that, or Better Call Saul?
I do.
Okay. She's a terrific actress and a brilliant writer and director. And she said, would you come to New York and do this web series I've created with her husband, Kevin Early, who is a brilliant actor and singer? And I said, sure. They said, we'll fly you in. I said, really? So they flew me in to New York around in the wintertime. And this was the second and last season of this series, which is just a web series. They're only 10 minutes long, these episodes, and it's about a group of couples who are trying to sort of work a group therapy out, only they don't want to pay for a therapist, so they try to do it themselves with predictable results. And I came in and I played the father of this wonderful actress and playwright named Susan Ferrara. And I'm telling you, it was the best written material I have had to work with in 10 years, you know. And it's great. So I will, if you want, I'll send you the link, or you can go to my website and it's, you know, you can link to it from there. But it's brilliant, and she's brilliant. And I had so much fun doing that. And we shot everything. They shot like 7 episodes in one day. But it's great. She's won awards for it and so forth. But so, you know, when I teach, and every now and then, you know, I go down to San Marcos, Texas, you know, Texas State, outside of Austin. Well, I have 3 friends who teach there. One of them teaches black and Hispanic playwriting, and his name is Eugene Lee. We were in a soldiers play in New York 30-some years ago. Well, he's native Texan, and he actually went there with Thomas Carter, the director. They're good friends. And it had a different name, North Texas, something like that. And my friend Jim Price and his wife, Caitlin Hopkins, and they teach the musical theater department down there. And I've gone down there a couple of times to run a workshop, just for the acting aspect of it, obviously not the musical theater stuff. But that's what I tell these kids. I say, and I'm going back to St. Louis actually to do something similar on 9/11. But I say, you don't have to go to New York, you don't have to go to Chicago, you don't have to go to L.A. You can do it right here, and that's the upside of this technology, quite honestly. And I love that. I mean, I will self-tape an audition 9 times out of 10 these days. If they want me to read for something, I go, sure. They go, if I go to the audition, is the director going to be there? No. They're just going to tape you and send it to the director. I said, well, then I'd rather do it here because I'll make it look better and it'll be a better performance, and I'll send it along. So, I think that's a great savings, in fact.
Actually, I misspoke when I said the thing I know you from is Christmas Vacation. It's 2 things. Oh. So, showing my age a little bit, both of them they're not per se adult programming. One of my favorite shows still, because I'm a huge fan of puppets and puppetry, is Dinosaurs.
I thought you were going to say something else, and I have to give full props to this. When I came out in '86, I did a couple of guest shots right off, which was great because I got my feet under me, But the big job I got was the Tracey Ullman Show, which I did for 3.5 years. And I loved her, and I had a ball doing that show. I'm only sad that I didn't go on and do The Simpsons like my castmate Danny Castellaneta and Julie Kavner did, but that's baseball. I did, however, manage to do Dinosaurs for 4 years, and it was a blast. It was actually my favorite character I've ever done, I think, He was just perfect. And he was really a meld of Jack Burns and George Carlin, and Art Carney. Oh, these are some of my heroes, particularly Art Carney and Carlin. But I loved doing that show, and it was funny and it was political, So that every time the network would object to something as being overtly political, Michael Jacobs would say, "Well, Dinosaurs didn't really have televisions." So everything was fair game. In fact, I played like the head of a motorcycle gang in one episode because I did other voices besides Roy, the dinosaur. I did, I did full on Arnold, and I basically, and you can cut this out or not, but we gang raped the kid, Leaf. What was his name? Leaf. Oh shit. Because he wanted to join the motorcycle gang, so we bend him over, and they shot it. I mean, you see, they kind of crop it, so you don't really see that he's getting fucked in the ass. But that's what was happening. I thought, my God, you've lost your mind. But there was some funny shit. They had a Barney character on there that Stu Pankin, who played, the lead dinosaur, beat the crap out of. That was brilliant, That was a funny show. Yeah. Kevin Clash playing the baby. Anyway, Jessica Walter and Sally Struthers, wow. Then there was a guy named Pons who did my character, but they didn't use his voice very often. Those guys, they had to work their asses off because they were, they were sweating to death on the set. We just came in and we just dubbed everything because they had an English guy who was my puppeteer. And they would read it and they would record him and then they would replace their dialogue with ours. But this guy's name was Dave, and he kind of talked like he had his thumb in his mouth, but he didn't talk quite as fast as me. But after a while, he tried to speed it up. So he goes, "Oh, Polly boy, how are you today? Yeah, I saw you over at the pit, And then we would dump it. It was the easiest money I ever made. That's all I could say. If I worked more than an hour, I was like, damn, The Stewart had to work a lot. Tankin is, he played. What was the lead guy's name? I was Roy, and he was Earl Sinclair. Also with the late, great Sherman Helmsley, who I had worked with in 1976. I came out for a summer, and I got one job. I did The Ropers. No, I did Jeffersons with him, with Sherman. Anyway, it was a piece of work, shall we say. But, yeah, that was a great show.
It is still one of my favorite shows, and whenever I tell people the ending of that show, no one ever believes me that the dinosaurs all freeze to death. Right.
Well, they knew they weren't coming back. We did 4 years. Well, have you heard the CD, the musical? The deal was, and this was Disney, so the mouse is cheap. But if they sold more than 56,000 copies, they had to give you an additional bump, and we did. And I heard that They were very upset at Disney that they had to pay extra money. Anyway, but it was a very enjoyable show. I think, quite honestly, the best thing Michael Jacobs ever done, you know. But I still see Stewart. We played golf together and stuff like that. He's a good man.
It was so ahead of its time, and it was a live action.
It was with Brian Henson, and Brian's he's on something now. I heard about. I can't remember what. Somebody saying, "Oh, working with Brian Henson," which was great. I can't remember what it was though. You know, took over for his dad. But you know, there were. You know, I have a rather long list of shows that deserved a much better fate, and not just the show I did called Likely Suspects, which I really loved. Also, we did the series of League of Their Own with the late great Gary Marshall, as well as Penny, of course. And Tom Hanks directed me as Tom Hanks in one episode. That was interesting. Not as Tom Hanks, but as, you know, Tom's character, which I did on the TV version. But also Freaks and Geeks, which has a very loyal following. And I did 3 of those. They only did 9, I think. You know, certainly deserved a better fate. They actually did a reunion of everybody about a year and a half ago. And, you know, there we were in a room full of young millionaires. I was like, wow, that's nice. You know? Seth Rogen and James Franco. So I took a picture of James Franco and sent it to my younger daughter, and she swooned, you know.
Oh, right.
Yeah. But Linda Cardellini, who I adore, and, you know, and Sam and John Daly, of course, has become a very good writer. He wrote that the thing that Steve Carell did with my friend Bob Scardino, directed, you know, Burr Wonderstone or whatever it was. Anyway.
Right.
And of course, you know, why am I blanking on the lead? You know, the head writer's name, Judd. You know, Apatow. Yeah, great guy. And he just called me out of the blue, said, "I want to come and do this show." I said, "Sure," and we had a ball. And then Amy Aquino and I were supposed to separate after she finds out that I've been stepping out. And then he had a whole story planned, which would have been interesting because it would have been really the first time that you explored a relationship between a sort of an estranged father and son, me and Sam. But the show didn't go further. And, of course, David Krumholtz played my other son, if you remember that. But that was a terrific show. So, yeah, well, you know. After a while, you know, when you're younger, you think, well, I'll get another one. But after a while, you realize this is probably finite, you know. Oh, well. So, and I did the show Costello last year, which I thought deserved, and it looked like it was coming back, and then it didn't for political reasons, essentially, which is too bad. But that show business, or as, you know, the late Abe Vigoda said, he is dead, right? This is the business we've chosen, Michael. Yes, right. He finally died, yeah. Not only that, I didn't know he was Jewish, actually, so go figure. I thought he was Italian.
Well, he played in Italian very convincingly.
He did indeed, like David Proval did on not only Mean Streets, but on The Sopranos, you know. In fact, I was going through Mean Streets the other day. I was thinking about it. And you know it, of course, right? There aren't any real bona fide Italians in that movie. De Niro's actually, I think, Corsican. Keitel is German and Jewish. David Proval is Jewish. The guy who, I can't remember his name. That's terrible. I know him. The guy who plays, I got a case full of Jap-adapters, you know, the one who says, "I borrowed money from you because you only jerk off." What the hell is his name? He's Lebanese, and he's from New Hampshire, of all places. So there aren't a lot of Italians in Mean Streets, except for Scorsese, but he gets to cast himself. It's funny.
So you talk about the Tracey Ullman Show,
yes,
and Dan Castellaneta and some of the other folks going on to be in The Simpsons, the longest running, you know, TV show ever. What was it like working on the Tracey Ullman Show, you know, back when it was, you know, before The Simpsons became what it is now, and that transitioned into that?
Well, by the time the Tracey Ullman Show was finished, the Simpsons was blowing up a bit. But for the most part, I mean, when we first did it, they would grab you. We'd be on the set at Fox, and they'd say, "Can we get you for 5 minutes?" And you'd go up in the sound booth, and you'd lay down stuff wild. Now, there was not just The Simpsons. There was another cartoon series, and that was the one that I got. And I can't remember the name of it. There are people who can, but I do not. It was more of a Jules Pfeiffer kind of thing, as opposed to, you know, Matt Groening's thing, which, you know, full credit, Brooks had discovered, because he had a thing in the free paper out here. And that's what became The Simpsons. I actually did a Simpsons or two. In fact, I have the so-called distinction of doing the only character that was originally created outside The Simpsons on The Simpsons. I did a lounge singer, like a Tom Jones character called Gulliver Dark. I think we did a bunch of, I think maybe 6 of those on the Tracey Ullman Show, but then they animated it. and I sang on Simpsons too, and I did one other, I think. And then as it just turned out, Hank Azaria wound up doing basically all the sort of, utility player stuff, which turned out to be very, lucrative. And I was doing the other one, so, oh well, But when we did the series, it was hard work because we would do 3 or 4 new sketches every week, and they wouldn't necessarily be related. So that basically you're running around like crazy. You're taking off wigs. I mean, Tracey is the paradigm of this, and talk about hard working. She'd be taking off a wig, changing wigs, changing prosthetics maybe, never mind wardrobe and so forth. And then we would move on to the next set and so forth, and shot a one-camera film. And when we do musical numbers, she would not sing to playback. So we would do it live. And at one point they had an 18-piece orchestra in there. Tracey and I sang. It was a big courtroom singing. We sang a version of The Man Who Got Away. Do you know the song from A Star Is Born? Judy Garland sings. So she and I sang it, and it was electric, I got to say. But, I mean, they had 18 pieces in there, and they were like well-known musicians. A guy named Bill Watrous was a great trombone player. And the drag was, when it aired, Fox had squashed the sound, so it was like, fart in a wind tunnel. So there were times that it was absolutely electric. And there were other times where, okay, but it was certainly different. It was unlike anything else. And sadly, it didn't go forward. And I have to say that this was not Tracey's call at all. This was something of a far less honorable dispute that happened. And it wasn't about Tracey at all. But at any rate, she opted out finally, and it was too bad because it deserved better, And some of the work I look back on it, and it's going on 30 years now. Some of it 25, 30 years ago. Some of it I go, that's really good. I mean, every now and then I look at it, and when I first did the show, they'd actually begun. They were like in their 4th episode, and I auditioned for this gay character who was like a stepfather, if you will, to Tracey's 13-year-old girl, who was Francesca, which she did brilliantly, which you had braces in the whole shot. And Dan Castellaneta played her birth father, and I was his partner, right? I was her William, as she called it. That was my character. So I auditioned for that, got it, did the 1 episode. Then we were on a hiatus, and they called and said, we want to make him a regular. Well, it took the 2 weeks hiatus to make the deal go down, which, believe me, was not generous. But it was money, And I came back, and I did the first scene I had after I'd been made a regular was with this young actor named Matt Perry. And he was brilliant. And I thought, this guy's got a future. And I was right. And then I wound up doing, Friends, playing his boss on that some years later and so forth. So it was a seminal show in many respects. And it also really put Fox on the map. Fox had Married with Children, which was their hit. And then they had some other shows. And then they had us. And over 3 years, Fox got 22 Emmy nominations, all of them for the Tracey Ullman Show. And in the last year, we won, which was a shock. But we were basically I don't know what you want to call it. We legitimized the network in many respects because Fox was considered a weblet, which they did on purpose. They only had 14 hours of original programming. And if you had 15 hours of original programming, then you had to pay network rates. But when they were a weblet, they got away with paying syndication rates. So the money was shit, in short. But I worked for them again. I did another series. I did 2 more series with them, including one that Alan McEwen, Tracey Ullman's husband, who's passed on now, sadly, produced, called Birds of a Feather, which I did with Rosie O'Donnell and finally with Melissa Gilbert. At first it was Christine Ebersole, and then a girl named Leela Kensel playing my wife. And then they didn't replace it. Then they shot the pilot again with Melissa, and that got us on the air. And interestingly, Melissa is married to a good friend of mine now, Timothy Busfield. And they've moved back to Michigan, and she's good people. Anyway, as is Tim. As is Rosie, for that matter. But that didn't go, and then I did another one for them. I did League of Their Own. That was CBS, but I also did this other show I really loved called Likely Suspects. And it was a half-hour, one-camera whodunit, and I would speak to the camera. The camera was my partner, but you didn't know if it was a man, a woman, anything like that. But he was a visible presence. He was a, palpable presence, shall we say. You never saw him, though. It was an interesting show. And it won 2 Edgars, which I thought was really interesting in the one season we did. So, and such is my life.
So you talk about being on shows and them getting kind of unceremoniously canceled. And you've mentioned, another one's going to come around and that may or may not ever happen. What is that? What is that like? Kind of walk me through your thought process when you're on a show like that, everyone feels like they're doing a great job. It's a good show. And then it just kind of falls apart. Kind of walk me through kind of what is that like being in that?
I remember when I did the show like with Suspects, everybody thought it was going forward. And I was a lead on the show. So kind of a, de facto producer. And some of the crew was great. And they came to me and said, what do you think? I said, they tell us we're going forward. So I remember this one guy who they called Stick Shift for some reason, said, okay. And he turned down the job. And then the show didn't go forward. And I felt terrible about it. But I've been, as candid as I knew how to be about that. I mean, shit happens. Costello looked like he was going forward. In fact, 3 days before they announced, the now deposed head of ABC, what's his first name? His last name is Lee. He's actually a Brit. Called up Costello Alonso and said, you're coming back. And then they reneged. Now, who knows why, So that was particularly a drag because that show was, sort of a throwback. It was old network. It was real money they were paying and so forth. And we had done 22 plus the pilot. So, it was a really good year for me. And this was just last year. So we all thought, well, we're coming back. And then it didn't. Freaks and Geeks had started off rather well. And they got bumped by baseball, by the World Series. So when was this? 2000, 99, somewhere in there. And Garth Ancier, who I'd known when he was a younger executive at Fox, was the head of NBC at the time, and I think a very honorable guy. And when they put Freaks and Geeks back on the air, they lost traction because nobody knew where the show was, because they were moving it around because baseball had preempted it. So then they stopped it, and they went to Judd Apatow, and they said, because I remember doing a pilot actually for NBC at the time, so I was kind of privy to these conversations because I would see Garth. And they said, if we do an 8, they will pick up the last 3. So, which, an 8 is kind of like nothing, but it was, a number. And we did an 8 exactly. And true to his word, he picked us up for 3 episodes, but that was basically, it was also kind of, an indication that we weren't going forward. I did a show the same year that ER started and Chicago Hope. I did the Fox version, which was a show called Medicine Ball. We shot it up in Seattle, and it was easily the equal of the other two. And ER and Chicago Hope both came out before ours did. And ER, of course, was, big fat winner. Chicago Hope was respectable, but ER was, And Fox, in their wisdom, decided, to push back the premiere of our show 2 months. And we're going, why are we doing this? They said, well, we don't want it to look like a Me Too product. I said, not that they were asking me, but I thought if you push the debut of the show back 2 months, it's exactly what it's going to look like,
Right, exactly.
So, but it also became this thing, when they had first commissioned the pilot, there was a different head of programming at Fox. By the time we got into production and the ER happened and so forth, there was a different head of Fox. And that person said, but this is not my show. And you want to go, excuse me, but it's a network show. It's not your network. Do you know what I mean? It's not a blah, blah, blah. It's not a Sam McMurray show. It's a Fox show. So, I've always found this astonishing. That they'll go, yeah, but it's not my show. We go, well, pardon me, but you're nobody but a bird of passage. You're going to be out on your ass in 6 months anyway, but the network will still be there, Anyway. So that was a major drag, but we also saw that one coming. Trying to think if I was ever, Well, this last one, Costello, was a bit of a shock. We thought for sure we were coming back. But, I mean, that's, I'm Jiminy Cricket, the actor's life for me. That's what happens all the time. My parents were both actors, so I grew up with that. You have no security. Of course, the joke is that nobody has security. I don't care if maybe if he's a banker, yes. No, not even if he's a banker. There is no such thing. So,
right.
And it's sometimes it's a drag because, you don't feel like I'm doing this 42 years. I don't feel like, dragging out my dog and pony show and doing a tap dance for some casting director who's 30 years younger than me. But you know what? It also, and my daughter is an actress and she's a terrific actress. But it's so hard for them now. It's so much harder now than it was. Let me just put it that way. Because when I first started in 1974, I landed with this big agent in New York. I didn't know, it was just through the phone call from the guy who had taken headshots of me. This guy had discovered Robert Redford and put him in Barefoot in the Park, a man named Stark Hesseltine, and he started sending me out because he liked me, and this is what they don't do anymore. He was happy to grow talent, saying, a few years down the road, you're going to be making some money. It's going to be good. I mean, I've been with my agent for a long time now through 3 different manifestations, 3 different agencies and so forth. But, it's fine. And I've been with my voiceover agent for, close to 30 years. But I wouldn't want to have to shop again. I'll tell you that. So, but I will say one thing about getting older is that I say no now a little more easily because, you come out of the kind of needy profession where you just say yes to everything and, let the chips fall where they may, and then you sort it out later. Now, if I don't like something, I won't go. So, and that's not a bad thing. It's all right. It's called Marlon Brando, not a waterfront. Don't you have any ambitions? I figure I'd live a little longer without it. Right? Him and Eve Marie Saint. Gene Hackman, who I think is in the Parthenon. He was there, he was working his ass off, trying to get jobs, doing off-Broadway stuff, getting paid nothing and so forth. And then he hits with Bonnie and Clyde and then French Connection. And then he did a number of films, some of which are maybe questionable quality. But, to me, it struck me as that's the hungry actor going, I'm never going to be poor again. Whatever you want, I'll do this thing. I think Gene Hackman's a great actor, and I'd watch him read the phone book. But we get like that, You gotta make the money when you can. And quite honestly, for women, it's particularly imperative because if you're over 35, good luck to you. It's not like men who can age gracefully into the next type. I mean, and that has happened to me. I had a few years where I was sort of not old enough, but too old in other respects. I let my hair go white, and all of a sudden I'm Mr. Drysdale, the banker, or the hotshot lawyer. That's fine. But it's not an easy life. But, it's okay. It's certainly, I said this before, it's a noble craft. It's a horrible business, but it's certainly noble craft, I think, But art and commerce do not necessarily mix. As my mother was an actress for 70 years, always in New York. Although she came out here from time to time, did some movies, including the best thing she's in is Up the Sandbox, a Barbra Streisand movie. She plays her mother in that. But my mother did a lot of theater, a lot of charter member of the Actors Studio. And she used to say, you know what? Who asked you? In other words, no one had made you be an actor. If you don't like it, leave. And that's certainly a viable question to ask yourself each and every day. And if the answer comes up no often enough, I don't want to be an actor, well, then you might want to consider something else, So, I mean, I salute everybody who does it. I salute, people who are dancers, writers, any art, whether it's interpretive or creative. I think, that's how humanity goes forward, quite honestly. But I don't think there's anything ignoble about doing anything else or providing for your family. I mean, those are heroes for me. People who get up and go to a job they don't like every day for 20 years in order to put food on the table, God bless them. I can't do it. So, I'm fortunate in many respects. And I'll never retire. That's the good thing about being an actor. You never retire, really. I mean, Gene Hackman's retired, but he's, 88 years old or something. And I guess Nicholson is retired. Nicholson, too, apparently, I think, is done. So we were talking about Dan Laurie is a friend of mine. He's a wonderful actor. And Dan admires, as I do, the great actor Charles Durning, And Charlie Durning just worked until he couldn't work anymore. Jack Warden. These guys are my heroes. Richard Mulligan. I love all those. Those are my Jerry Orbach. Those are the people I adore and admire, Those are working actors, and I think they're great. So a lot of women too, but that's, another time. So, and I'm happy to join the ranks. I mean, I have friends like Steve Root and Dan Laurie and, oh God, my friend the playwright, Lee Blessing, and these people, we go play golf, we hang out, and it's not so bad,
Right.
So.
And you do what you love, and that's kind of all that matters.
Yeah. I mean, sometimes you don't love it, and you do it, but it's a way of, paying the rent and so forth, and that's okay, too. There's nothing wrong with it, But, yeah, in many respects, I'm really blessed, I think, And I'm proud of my daughter, as I am of my parents, because my dad was an actor as well, as I told you. And my dad, my mother, and my stepmother were all actors. My ex-wife was an actress. So, she became a therapist. She smartened up, but she was a very good actress too. But and now my older daughter is an actress, and she's going out on the road dirty dancing. So look for it in your area. I think it comes to Dallas, actually. I'm sure it does. This tour has been out on the road, I guess, for 3 years or something. She'll be out for a year with it, but that's okay. You know, she wants to work, and it's equity, so that's a big break for her.
Last question: Is there anything you're working on now that you haven't mentioned already? Anything stand out to you?
I have to say no at the moment. There's nothing. No, I did Devious Maids. I think I told you that. Which is just finished airing for the season. That was a lot of fun. I did 4 of them. I don't know whether I'm coming back. I don't know whether the show is coming back, but I enjoyed myself. But, you know, I love that kind of work. I mean, you just fly into Atlanta, meet new people, and hang out and so forth. But no, for the most part, I'm wide open, so I'm sure I'll make plans, and then something will come along and screw them up, you know. That's just the way of living. No, but that's all right. I'm actually looking forward to going to St. Louis and teaching this master class. I think I mentioned this, right? Because it's, I think, going to be a little different because I won't be dealing with students so much as people in the business, and I think it'll be a revelation for me. I don't know if it'll be any good for any of the people who have to pay for it, but I'm looking forward to doing that. I don't see myself teaching by any stretch of the imagination at full time, but teaching also gives you an opportunity to sort of make a narrative of your own career, you know, and then see what you can impart to people. And I do enjoy it. As I said, I've done it both at Texas State and then Northern Iowa, which was really interesting because Hannah, my daughter, came with me. And that was great because she could really talk to the younger group, you know. So that's what I'm working on right now. So, you know, I'm trying to be a little more self-generating than the usual actor's existence, which waits on the phone call, you know. So I try not to do that so much anymore. Well, and the truth is now, and it's different than when I started, what is better now is that you can do for yourself now. You can do a web series. You can, you know, you can blog. You can do whatever you want. You can build your own website and put your stuff up there, you know, even if you're shooting it on an iPhone. I mean, it looks fine, you know, put it up there. Do some scenes. Do your own series. Write something. That's I think, is as important as anything, you know. Produce it yourself. And you can do that now. And you can be in Dallas. You don't have to be in L.A. You can be in Boston. You know, you can be in Podunk. There's, you know, I mean, look at, you know, all these shows that have, you know, all these YouTube phenomena. Ridiculous, you know. But it's good, too. Like they said, you know, when cable expanded and so forth, there's going to be a lot more work. They didn't say that it's going to be for a lot less money, but, well, that's true, too. But there are a lot more opportunities. That's what the amazing thing is, you know, if you work for the network, as I did a year ago, and I shouldn't say this, but it really hasn't caught up to them, the fact that, you know, people are doing stuff for no money. And every now and then you get lucky with the network show, and they're paying you like it's 1986. You go, great, thanks very much, you know. But, you know, I'm sure that'll change, too.
Yeah.
Anyway. All right, man.
Yeah, thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule to sit down and talk with me. This has been great.
Not at all, Chris. Thank you.
Big thanks to Sam McMurray for sitting down and talking with me about Raising Arizona and my personal favorite, Dinosaurs. It was a really great interview. I hope you all enjoyed it. In the future, we'll be bringing you more interviews, and we'll be releasing our backlog of one-on-one interviews from the site. So make sure to keep an eye on those in the Kulturecast feed. You can check out the feed on iTunes and Stitcher Radio or any podcast app on iOS or Android. You can follow me at Culture Stash. Check out the website at Kultureshocked.com. The music that you're hearing in the beginning and the end of this one-on-one interview is from Wovoka, and that is their song Lament off their self-titled first album. The music in between the interviews is from the Raising Arizona soundtrack. If you would like to kick a couple dollars our way so that we can keep the lights on, head on over to patreon.com/culture_shocked and make sure to keep an eye out for this week's Kulturecast and the next one-on-one interview.